tonight. Good to see you. Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. So glad you're here. Be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are back on here streaming. Yeah, we're just going to have a late night conversation here in my Brooklyn apartment. It's going to be awesome. We're doing this one tonight, and we're going to do it again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have the day off work tomorrow, and so because of that, I will be streaming. So be sure to watch tomorrow night. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. We're going to do this here tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Just a quick rundown for those who might be new. The way that this works is that I give my opening remarks, which are then followed by the roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions. The whole time I'm speaking, I am writing down your super chat questions. I'm writing them down on the notepad while I drink the unnamed water beverage. And then I answer your super chat questions. That's how it works. Maybe stretch a little bit, get comfortable in your chair or in your walking or in your driving or whatever it is you happen to be doing. I know some people listen to this while they're in the shower. Some people listen to this while they're driving to work. Some people listen to this while they are at work. Some people listen to this while they exercise. Vaccinated given priority in ICUs. That's how this works. That's how this works. And I give my opening remarks, then the roll call, then answer the super chat questions for the remainder of the show. That's how it works. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Be sure to post this on Reddit. Be sure to post this on Twitter. Be sure to post this on Facebook. Pick a Facebook group. Pick a Facebook group that you like and post it in the Facebook group. Go to Lefty Poll or Bunker Chan or Prol Wiki or wherever videos are posted and post this. That would be great. The more people here, the more fun we have. Yeah, I guess I'll just jump right into it. A couple things. First things first. If you haven't had a chance to watch, okay. If you haven't had a chance to watch the conversation I had last night with Jackson Hinkle of The Dive and Haas of the Infrared Community, you really should go check it out. It's here on this channel. It's on Jackson Hinkle's channel. It's all over the place. Thank you, Neil Frazier, for your super chat. Much appreciated. It was a really great conversation. We talked about this debate about whether or not one can be a socialist or a communist and be patriotic. And my position has long been that we can be and we should be. That patriotism doesn't mean national chauvinism. It doesn't mean supporting racism or wars. It just means you want a better country for the people who live there. You have affection for the people in the country in which you live. You want to make things in that country better, and that in order to be true internationalists, we should be patriots, and in order to be patriots, we should be internationalists. You can't love the United States without wanting to dismantle capitalism and imperialism, and you can't want to get rid of the global system of monopoly capitalism but leave it intact in the United States, right? That internationalism and patriotism are tied up together. We came at this from a number of angles. I'm not going to repeat that on this stream. Go and watch it because Haas is great and Jackson Hinkle is amazing, and I am excited about both of them. They both have their unique way of doing things. Jackson Hinkle was just down in D.C. doing an Occupy Congress action. Haas has been building his community. He has a Hegelian philosophical approach. It was a great stream all around. I'm glad I did it. So if you haven't had a chance to go watch, by all means, please check it out. And, it is weird. I've noticed that the world suddenly picks up the pace in September, right? It's now mid-September. Today is September 15th, the middle of September. And, kids are back in school. The UN General Assembly is going to happen next week, the big week of the UN General Assembly. I love Richard Mendhurst. Love him. Love him. Love him. Writing it down. And, Heidegger, right? Heidegger. Nazi Party. I'm getting more requests. Various podcasts are reaching out to me. There could be some big debates coming up soon with some people on the right and with some people on the left. And there's also just some interviews and some streams that are possibly coming up. So good things are happening for our community. But that all depends on you. I mean, you guys make this happen. We've been on here beating the drum that we need a government of action to fight for working families, out of the movement to the masses. We've been beating that drum on here, and our community has been growing and growing and growing and getting bigger and getting more effective and stronger all along. It's very exciting what has been happening. So let's just keep doing what we're doing. The Center for Political Innovation is expanding. Meetups are happening around the country. Great conference happened last week in California, 2 weeks ago in California. We had a Pennsylvania gathering where I gave the Saxton lectures, the presentations. What else is happening? A lot is happening. We had a great speak out the John Brown volunteers did for the commemoration of 9/11 on Saturday. There was a gathering in Union Square, and the John Brown volunteers and the Center for Political Innovation and some great friends of this community. We were all out in the streets, for the anniversary of 9/11. You can watch the video of that that's been posted. A lot of real stuff is happening, and that is my orientation. My orientation is toward building a real community of solidarity, not just getting on here and speaking my mind, but not also being part of the mess called the left. I'm not a member of any of these parties. I'm not a member of the RCP or the ISO or the QWH or the DSA or the XYZ. Not a member of any of those groups, and I'm not trying to be. I'm building a think tank. I'm trying to build the Center for Political Innovation, CPIUSA.org, as a community of solidarity, an educational socialist think tank dedicated to promoting the city building tendency. That's what I'm doing, and a lot of great folks are on board already. City building socialism is catching on like wildfire. Jackson Hinkle loves our message. Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist trucker, loves our message. A lot of good stuff. Socialism still be necessary without imperialism. Without imperialism. We're growing. We're really, really growing. I mean, there's reading groups happening in Chicago now every week. It's amazing stuff. We've got reading groups happening in Texas every week. We've got a California state organizing committee. It's really exciting. We have our outreach team on the streets of New York City every day, and they're out every day, and it's really great. And in fact, this Friday is going to be the anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. It'll be the 10-year anniversary, and I'm hoping that I'll be dropping by the commemorations in Zuccotti Park on Friday. So fingers crossed, right? I'm hoping to be there on Friday. That should be good. The John Brown volunteers are definitely going to be there, and we're gonna try to be there. So if you're in New York City, you want to stop by the 10-year anniversary of Occupy Wall Street at Zuccotti Park at noon on Friday. That's the place to be, and I will probably, in all likelihood, I will be there. Fingers crossed. A lot of good things are happening. We are building a community around this YouTube channel. This is more than just me getting on here and speaking my mind. Not that I don't do plenty of that, right? And you all love to hear me speak my mind. And, that's what we like here, is that this is, this is personal. I'm a real guy. I'm not a robot reading you a statement. I'm a real person, and you're real people, and we have our running jokes, and we have our community here. So if you're part of this community, if you're a person who's a fan in the chat, if you're a hater, if you're a lurker, if you're somebody who enjoys these streams, by all means, we're going to have a patrons-only stream for those who are members on Patreon. That'll be on October 1st. We're going to have that. So by all means, sign up so you can be part of that. Those are little intimate streams where I just answer people's questions for at least an hour. Those are great. So you want to sign up and be part of the patrons-only stream, by all means, you can sign up for that. And I guess I'm going to spend most of my opening remarks tonight. So I wasn't sure I was going to talk about this, okay? Because what people like about these streams is that I don't talk about what it seems like, quote unquote, everybody's talking about. I don't do that. I don't talk about what everybody's talking about. I don't do that. I talk about other stuff. I tend to talk about unique topics. I tend to talk about things that are not what everybody's talking about. And I cannot, for the life of me, for the last 2 days, I have not been able to get on social media without seeing AOC's butt with the words "tax the rich" scrawled across it in red ink. So I just, there's part of me that just thinks, well, I shouldn't talk about that because that's what everybody's talking about. You get on any socialist left-wing stream, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about AOC's dress, the very expensive dress that AOC wore that had the words "tax the rich" scrawled across her buttocks in red ink. And people are criticizing her, saying what a waste. Other people are defending her. And, I'm tempted to not talk about it. There's part of me that just says, don't talk about this stuff. This is the petty shit that, did I just swear there? See, this is the petty garbage that the left we talk about. We're sitting here talking about what clothes people wear, how much money people have. We're calling people fake socialists. We're calling people fake socialists for calling people fake socialists. It's a circular firing squad. Everybody's canceling everybody else. It's shrill. We got a meme where people are, wiping out "tax the rich" and they're writing other things on AOC's butt. And I just, there's part of me that just says, don't go there. Don't go there. However, one thing that I will say is that when I talk about what, quote unquote, everybody is talking about, I'm sure there's plenty of people in the United States that are not talking about this, but everyone in our little corner of the internet is talking about this. When I talk about these things, I tend to talk about them in a way that other people are not talking about them. So I'm going to give you an interpretation of the AOC dress and its significance from a few different angles. And perhaps along the way, we can look at this from different angles. Right? I'm not here to tell you how much you should hate AOC. She's certainly disappointed me in many, many ways. I've met her before too, and I would be happy to meet her again. But she's not an anti-imperialist by any means. I question whether or not she's a socialist. Honestly, she's got a DSA background, but there's a lot of things about her that have surfaced that have made me think. But regardless, I want to come at this from a couple angles. So first of all right, Popular Front versus United Front. Front versus United Front. A united front. I'm going to come at this from a couple of different angles. First things first, it's pretty clear that this was an attempt by AOC's publicity team, and probably a very successful attempt. I mean, look, everybody's talking about it. We're all talking about it. I can't log into Twitter or Facebook for 2 seconds without seeing the dress. This was an attempt to pull a Murdoch, right? This is Rupert Murdoch. This is Rupert Murdoch's propaganda mass marketing formulation, right? So do folks know who Rupert Murdoch is? Rupert Murdoch is an Australian media tycoon. He's the owner of News Corporation, which now owns the Wall Street Journal, it owns Fox News, and it owns Sky News in the UK. And Rupert Murdoch figured out that appealing to people's sexual desires in a way that gives them the ability to feel like they are not appealing to their sexual desires is a very effective marketing technique. right? So Fox News and Sky News were infamous for this. And I think he tried this. He had a newspaper, if I'm not mistaken, he had a newspaper in the UK that had topless women in it. But it was a very conservative newspaper. And I think he then tried this with Sky News and with Fox. Fox News is famous for the beautiful, blonde supermodel reporter who sits there, you know, on screen in cleavage, and she sits there and talks about how, public libraries need to ban pornography, and how the internet needs to be taken out of libraries because children can see porn, and why gay pride parades should be canceled, and why traditional family values are what's needed, and why we need to get back to the Bible. And she's saying all this with her boobs hanging out. And it's perfect. It's brilliant. And you would think that that wouldn't work. You would think that people that are all conservative and socially conservative and don't want to see breasts and don't want to see butts and don't want to see porn and don't want to see naked people would be furious. And they would look at, that beautiful woman scantily clad and say, "Get away from me." But they don't, right? Because that beautiful woman who's scantily clad is also giving them a socially conservative speech. And you can see this in the careers of Ann Coulter, for example, and more recently in Lauren Southern. These are beautiful women who are kind of modeling themselves, but at the same time pushing a socially conservative message. And it works because it gives people the ability to be titillated, not just to be titillated by what they're looking at, but titillated by the message a little bit, but also maintain the illusion of being socially conservative, of not being turned on, of not... It's like it gives you you can have your cake and eat it too. On the one hand, you can be an uptight conservative who is raging against sexuality and urging people to be more decent, and you can be titillated. You can talk about sexual topics, you can look at scantily clad women, so you're being titillated at the same time that you're getting to maintain your conservatism. And it's a very effective model. And that this was a big part of neoconservative politics. Rupert Murdoch, I mean, he was just a media tycoon, a media company owner, newspapers, TV networks, etc. But you had the whole reinvention of conservatism in the United States with Leo Strauss and Irving Kristol and the neoconservative movement. You had the rise of Ronald Reagan. And this odd marketing formulation, which wasn't even really about politics per se, it was really about marketing. It was just how do you sell conservative politics. This odd marketing formulation of beautiful women, stories about sex, tabloid journalism, celebrity gossip, all the things conservatives are against, mixed in with social conservatism, and we don't like that, and this kind of conservative populism against sexuality, against pornography, against homosexuality, against in favor of religion, in favor of traditional family, blah, 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 is a beautiful formula. It's a beautiful, effective marketing formula. And it went far beyond. This almost defined the American right wing. For example, I don't know if you have those, right? Again, I'm in New York City, right? And we have bookstores in New York City. We got Barnes & Noble, and there's a couple independent bookstores. There's a big bookstore in New York City called Strand Books. It's the biggest bookstore in the world. We have bookstores, mostly corporate chain bookstores, Barnes & Noble being the biggest one. We also have some independent bookstores here and there, little ones. But around the Midwest, in the areas that I grew up in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Indiana, in shopping malls in the 90s, you would have what they called Christian bookstores, right? They were called Christian bookstores, and they were bookstores that sold the Bible, sold religious books, religious CDs for contemporary Christian music. And what many people noticed about these Christian bookstores was that they were full of sex manuals, right? The section on, they'd have a section called Married Life. And there would be book after book after book. How to please your husband in a godly way. A guide to sex positions for Christian couples. And it was weird, right? Because these are Christian bookstores, right? They've got, they don't have that sinful secular music. They have Christian music. They don't have, Harry Potter books. They've got nothing but Veggie Tales. They're this conservative thing. But you go there, you go to the married life, whatever section, and it was full of sexual content. Now, of course, that sexual content is only for married couples, and it's got Bible verses all over it, but you're still titillating people. You're still turning them on. You're just trying to pretend it's something else. So, and a lot has been written about this strategy. This strategy for selling people sex, but doing it in a way to get them feel like you're not selling them sex. Right? And that's a huge part of neoconservatism. And a lot has been written about it, and people have made fun of it. And this was a big thing with the new atheist movement. They love to make fun of this. I believe Sam Harris used to say evangelical Christians in the United States are obsessed with sex. I think Richard Dawkins has said the same thing, that it was like the right wing thought about sex more than liberals did, right? Liberals were the ones who were just kind of like live and let live. If you want to be gay, you can be gay. You want to be trans, you can be trans. Not your business, our business. But it was conservatives that were constantly walking around going sex, 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 porn, porn, porn. I mean, it was like every thought out of conservatives was about sex. They were just against it. And it was very odd. Now, what's interesting is, so now, fast forward to 2021, the religious right, they basically got a really hard punch in the mouth during the Obama years. The new atheists, the evangelical Christian right, they're still around. You still got Mike Pence, you still got Mike Pompeo. But even among conservatives, the Christian right, the evangelical stuff, the neocons, that's kind of on the defensive. That's kind of out, right? I mean, it's a faction. It exists, right? Pat Robertson is still around. I think Jerry Falwell died, but Pat Robertson still has his show, the 700 Club or whatever. And, there's still Christian television and such. But, and I think you got the guy who used to be on Hercules, right? Kevin Sorbo. He used to play Hercules. And now Kevin Sorbo does, little Christian movies for Christian television. The evangelical Christian right is a lot weaker than it once was. But now the rising moralism is coming from the left, right? Nowadays, it's not the Christian right that is going around saying, how dare you read Harry Potter books? That's witchcraft. How dare you have a gay pride parade in the same city where there's a school? Our children will see that, you disgusting... how dare you? How dare you have sex education? The moralistic tone isn't coming from the right now. Now the moralistic tone is coming from the left, right? It's the left that has the moralistic tone, the shrill, accusatory tone, the you're with us or against us, the cancel culture, right? The need to punish and castigate dissidents. It's coming from the left that we now have this liberal tone. So then, and a big part of that has been, I mean, not to the same degree, I would say. It's totally different than conservatives, right? The modern left is very pro-sex, but there is a feeling that men are out of control, right? We talked Me Too, and sexual harassment is a horrendous problem, and there was the Me Too movement. And there's a feeling that women should not be objectified, and that you shouldn't be talking about women's bodies. You should be taking them seriously politically and not talking about their bodies and all of that. And there's this feeling that feminism, it's about empowering women and not judging them by their appearance and not leering at them, and Me Too. There's this whole, it's the right that has now captured the moralistic energy. Was it lefty pole? Okay, lefty pole, gay. It's the left that has captured this moralistic energy. Anyhow, so that's coming from the left. So in this atmosphere where the left is the ones encouraging people to be careful, the left is encouraging people to take women seriously, the left are the ones. The fact that AOC wrote, well, she didn't write it, I mean, it was a designer company that wrote Tax the Rich on her dress, or right over her butt, and then the picture went viral. that that was very effective, right? Because it gave all kinds of people permission to look at AOC, to objectify AOC, to be aroused by AOC, but pretend it's political, right? To pretend, well, I'm taking it, tax the rich. Oh, what do you? And it was kind of the same kind of Rupert Murdoch style trolling, and this is a form of marketing. It's very effective, right? The conservatives, it gives people the ability to think about sexual things, to be titillated, and pretend they're not doing it. And that's really what's going on here, and that's why it went viral. If she had worn, a button that said "tax the rich," no one would care. If she had worn a very expensive pair of boots, with "tax the rich" on them, no one would care. But this went viral because people are enjoying looking at her. Um, you know, uh, and that's what's going on here. And it's kind of interesting to see this Rupert Murdoch tactic be reintroduced and used among liberals, right? Because the thing is, liberals are not straight up anti sex the way conservatives presented themselves, right? They're all for sexual freedom. There's the sex worker movement. There's a feeling that sex workers should be accepted. There's more widespread acceptance for all kinds of sexual minorities, and conservatives love to attack this and make fun of this. So it's weird, but there's also more awareness about not leering at women and sexual harassment in the workplace and such. So this was an a very, very effective bit of mind trolling. I guess this was a very, very effective psyop, psychological operation from AOC's marketing team. And as much as I don't like AOC, and as much as I don't even really think the message is all that radical, I tip my hat to AOC's marketing team. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. I mean, that was a very sophisticated operation. No, they knew how to make sure that everyone talks about AOC for a couple days, right? And there were probably like 15 different dresses that they sat down with and looked over, and they said, which is going to be the one? Which is going to be the one that'll go viral? And they probably debated about what words to write on it. Should it be a longer phrase? Should it be a shorter phrase? And I must say, as somebody who works in media, as somebody who is very interested in human communication and all that, this is a very effective psyop. And it's worked. And we've all fallen into it. Look, even the people who hate AOC, we're all talking about it, aren't we? We're all talking about it. We've made memes out of it. We're all talking about it. This is brilliant. This is a brilliant psychological operation. But we should learn from this, right? This is how the human mind works. If you can give people the ability to have their cake and eat it too, to be titillated and feel like they're engaging in activism, to be titillated with deniability, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And that's what they did. So we should learn from this. Those of us who are serious about socialist politics and mass communication, we should learn from this. But at the same time, we should remember that we're not going to be able to out whiz bang the ruling class. We're not going to be able to out Fifth Avenue the ruling class. We're not going to be able to out mass market the ruling class. They control the means of information. It's going to be through building real communities of solidarity and brotherhood. That's how we're going to be able to build our movement. We are, as much as I'm all for having exciting presentations and speeches, and as much as I'm all for very good videos, and I'm all for slick literature and such, we're not going to be able to out whiz bang the bourgeoisie, to outdo them, right? They're always going to be way better at stuff like this than we are, right? They've got the money, they've got the resources, and they're propagandizing us with advertisements every day. Every single time you turn on the television, the bourgeoisie is trying to sell you a product. So it's just something to keep in mind. But, of course, now I have to say the part that those of you who are familiar with what we do here, you're going to go, of course, Caleb, We all know that. And I'm going to point out, tax the rich is not socialism. There's probably many of you watching going, oh, duh, Caleb, we knew that. But we have to say this, right? We have to say this because we need to communicate this to our coworkers. And we need to communicate this to our classmates. And we need to communicate this to our family members and the people in our neighborhood. When we engage people that we know about socialism, we have to make clear that socialism is not taxation. Because the conservatives and the neoliberal economists have worked very, very hard to convince people, oh, do you like paying taxes? I sure don't. Oh, you don't like paying taxes? Well, surprise there. Did you know that paying your taxes is communism? So don't you hate communism? This is like the oldest neoliberal trick that they do. The neoliberal economists have convinced people that socialism and paying taxes are the same thing, right? That socialism is paying taxes, and their logic goes like this. When you pay taxes, some of that money goes to pay for social programs. That is therefore, quote, the redistribution of wealth. And socialism is the redistribution of wealth. So therefore, paying taxes is socialism. The liberal response to this generally is, well, people should pay their fair share. Taxes are a necessity, and people should pay their fair share. That is generally the response. And so tax the rich means make the rich pay a bigger share, and that's their response. Well, there's taxation under every system. General Milley. Trump. There's taxation under every system. There has not been a society in history that has not leveled from some form of taxation. Taxation exists. And taxation exists in capitalist countries. Taxation exists everywhere. So if taxation is socialism, all societies have been socialist because they all have some form of state intervention into the economy, some form of taxation, some form of obligation of the individual to the state in some form or other. So every society in history has been socialist. Now, of course, that's not the case, right? Socialism is not redistribution of wealth. Let me repeat that. Socialism is not the redistribution of wealth. Redistribution of wealth happens under every system. Sometimes wealth is distributed to the top with corporate subsidies, with military contracts and government corruption and no bid contracts and there's plenty of corporate welfare, etc. Sometimes there are social programs to help those who are in need. Often social programs exist simply as a stimulus to the capitalist economy. For example, food stamps in the United States. Food stamps was set up during the Great Depression as a stimulus to the farmers and to agribusiness. Agribusiness largely depends on food stamps. If they were to get rid of food stamps, the big agricultural corporations, the big food conglomerates would lose all kinds of money because all kinds of low-income folks would not be able to buy food that they were once able to buy. I mean, the food stamp program, yes, it helps low-income people eat, and I am in favor of the food stamp program, but don't think it is simply created to benefit low-income people. It's created as a stimulus to American agribusiness, as a stimulus to big box stores, etc. So, it's important to point out. So redistribution of wealth goes on all the time. All the time. All the time. Redistribution of wealth goes on all the time. Socialism is not the redistribution of wealth. It is property relations. Socialism is an economy organized not for profit, but for the benefit of society. It's when the means of production, the banks, factories, and industries are organized and forced to work in the interest of society overall. Production organized for profit, the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, profits in command, That's capitalism. That might be profits in command with taxes, profits in command with light taxes, profits in command with heavy taxes, profits in command with heavy regulation, profits in command without regulation. Profits in command, the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, is capitalism. Under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. The means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Meaning that we don't have houses so people can live in them. We have houses so landlords and banks can make money off of them. We don't have food so people can eat it. We have food so big box stores and agribusiness corporations can make money from selling it. We don't have heating gas so people can be warm in wintertime. We have heating gas so that private companies that sell heating gas can make profits from it. The capitalist system is a system of production organized for profit, not for social good. And that is the capitalist system. And this contradiction of production for profit, not for use, not for social use, right? Worker co-ops, not for social use, it manifests itself in some pretty strange ways. I've told many stories about this. One story I've often told is about the time that I was a college student in Ohio and I went to the movies. And when I went to the movies, and I got an unnamed diet beverage. I asked them for a soda, and so they went to their fountain and they filled up my soda. They asked me what size soda I wanted. I said small. They took the cup and they filled it up. And they brought it to me, and they said, that'll be $5.50. And I thought, $5.50 for a soda that I could get at McDonald's or Burger King or Kentucky Fried Chicken or any other store for $1 or $1.50? $5.50. That is ridiculous. That's ridiculous. And on top of that, I don't think I had $5 in my wallet. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't want it. I didn't realize it cost $5.50. So the woman behind the counter said, oh, that's okay. She took my soda, she took the lid off of it, she walked over to the sink, and she poured it out. Now, what sense does that make? That doesn't make any rational sense. Right? That soda is the same to her down her sink or down my throat. It's the same, right? So why in the world would she dump the soda out? Why would she do that? Well, because that soda wasn't made for me to drink it. That soda was made for me to buy it. It was made to be sold. And if she gave it to me for free, then nobody would buy a soda. And then there would be free sodas and they wouldn't make a profit. So it made rational sense in the logic of capitalism. It makes perfect sense to dump the soda down the sink rather than give it to me. It makes perfect sense under capitalism because we have production for profit, not for social use. That's capitalism. Another example we've talked about is in New York City, often at restaurants. At the end of the night, they'll throw out the excess food. They'll throw it into the garbage. But before they throw that food into the garbage, they will take motor oil and dump motor oil on top of it. Why? So that no homeless person can go and take it out of the garbage and eat it. Right? That's pretty awful, isn't it? Isn't that pretty awful? Yeah, but if some homeless person ate it out of the garbage, then they wouldn't be buying it now, would they? And the store would lose money, right? That's capitalism. I think one of these stores, I forget which one of them, and I don't want to get it wrong or they'll sue me. So one of these stores in New York City, one of these not stores, but like one of these like shopping supermarket stores, I forget which one. There was an incident 5 or 6 years ago, made big news, um, because of the fact that that one of the employees was fired because they gave him a bunch of sandwiches that they had, like sandwiches at this store that you could buy, and you paid for them and he ate them. And at the end of the day, they gave him a bunch of sandwiches and they said, throw it in the garbage. And he kept them and he ate them rather than throw them in the garbage. And they fired him for it, for theft. Why? Why did they do that? Why would they fire him for theft? They were throwing them away. Because those sandwiches weren't made for people to eat. They were made to make profits from. And if people can just eat the food that you throw away, then they don't buy it from the store now, do they? And they lose profits. I work for a particularly large soda corporation. We dump out tons and tons of perfectly fine soda every day. Exactly, Fire Dog. Exactly. That soda, this is the capitalist system. It's production for profit. Socialism is eliminating production for profit. That's what socialism is. Socialism is when society as a whole takes control of the means of production and forces them to operate in a rational way. It is the abolition of the chaos of the market or the anarchy of production. That is what socialism is. It is putting human reason and logic in control of the economy. It is the implementation of central planning, production upon a predetermined plan, production for social use, production for need. That is what socialism is. Under capitalism, production is carried out for capital. Under socialism, production is carried out for society. That is the difference between capitalism and socialism. And you have market entities in socialism. You have private companies that are trying to make a profit. You have cooperatives, and you have state industries, right? You tend to have state-run banks, state-run steel mills, state-run power plants, state-run hospitals, state-run, state ownership of land in a lot of cases, state-run, car companies and auto manufacturing. You have state-run farms. You have state-run production. But in socialist societies, you can also have, private production. You can have private companies. But those private companies are under the control of the state. At any point, the government can come in and tell the private companies what to do. Those private companies are not free to function simply on the market logic. They're not free to function simply as for-profit entities. The state steps in. Often they will slip in American media, and they'll say things to the effect of, there's no such thing as a private corporation in China. They'll say that. Well, what do they mean? Because, yes, there are private companies in China, but at any point, the Chinese Communist Party walks in and says, nope, you do this, you do that, and they have to. They have no choice, right? And that, slave and state empires of antiquity and British Empire. Slave empires versus British Empire and differences. And what's this here? What's crazier? When you're at the movie theater, you have to buy water, which is ridiculous in NYC. The biggest tap. All right, buying water at movie theaters, right? And that's capitalism. It's not related to the tax rate, right? You can have production for profit and a high tax rate, low tax rate, tax rich people, tax poor people. That doesn't change the nature of why production is carried out. China is a socialist society because the means of production, the Chinese Communist Party controls them. They control the means of production. They force the means of production to work in the interests of society overall. Cuba is a socialist society. Venezuela, Nicaragua are socialist societies. Vietnam is a socialist society. Belarus is a socialist society. Socialism exists all across the world today. In Bolivia, many parts of the world have a socialist economy, right? Many of these countries are very poor, and they're building socialism on a low level of production. But with their rational planning, they are able, for example, in Cuba, to have a very, very efficient and effective healthcare system. very, very efficient and effective healthcare system, even though it's a very, a very small island with very limited resources, and it's facing an economic embargo for the United States. But because they've organized production rationally, they are able to provide health care for their population. They're able to provide universal employment and utilize the strengths of each person to build socialism. You look at China, and why has China been able to have huge amounts of economic growth? Why has China been able to have, such expansive economic growth? Because the state controls the means of production. And because it controls the means of production, it's able to make sure that the chaos of the market that leads to cyclical crises and overproduction and boom bust doesn't happen. And as a result of that, China is able to allow itself to have just continuous economic growth. Venezuela, very big private sector, but that private sector is completely centered around the state, right? In fact, most of the major private companies in Venezuela get a subsidy from the government and are told by the Venezuelan government what to do. And the Venezuelan government exerts control over these private companies all the time. So again, they may be private, but they're all centered around oil subsidies. All right, Boris Yeltsin, Russia. They're all centered around oil subsidies, and the state controls the oil. And that's how many of the Ba'ath countries operated. That's how Libya under Gaddafi operated. Or how, that's how the economy is organized, right? This is the nature of socialism. Socialism is production organized for social good. And socialism, it is believed, could give way to the higher stage of communism. And communism is after rational central planning has been applied to the economy, to the entire global economy, for a very long time, and human beings have been able to invent technology and to develop production, and we're able to wipe out scarcity. At that point, inequality completely fades away, and the state completely fades away, and we get to a post-scarcity society. A post-scarcity society where people can just kind of do what they feel like doing and take what they need, from each according to his own ability to each according to his needs. That is socialism, right? And it's a society where the need for the government can fade away. Why would people hoard anything? Why would people commit crimes if everyone's going to have everything they need? Why would some people need to have more than everybody else if everyone's going to have everything they need? They talk about a refrigerator in a wealthy family. The parents will just let the kids take whatever they want out of the refrigerator because it's always going to be there. But in a low-income family, the parent has to very closely regulate what goes in and out of the refrigerator, right? And that the state itself, the need for a government, the need for coercion, is rooted in scarcity. It is scarcity that causes coercion. It is scarcity that causes inequality. It's scarcity that causes social hierarchies. But in the absence of scarcity, when everyone has everything they need, in a post-scarcity society, a society of vast abundance, the need for social hierarchy, the need for the state, the need for inequality, the need for regulating who has what kind of can fade away, right? And that is the vision. And this is the economics of socialism. That's socialism, right? That's the understanding of socialism. This is scientific socialism. It's understanding that capitalism is production organized irrationally for the profits of a few. And in order to resolve that, you need to have a centrally planned economy. And with a centrally planned economy, you can eradicate scarcity because capitalism puts artificial restraints on human creativity and human abundance. That's what it does. It puts artificial restraints on human creativity and abundance, right? It holds back human creativity. Under capitalism, the more efficient the means of production become, the poorer people get. The better they get at organizing production, the fewer workers they hire, pretty soon they can't sell the products anymore, right? The more efficient technology becomes, the fewer workers that are hired, workers are eliminated from the assembly line, workers cannot buy back the product that they produce, and you have a collapse. And this is the built-in boom-bust cycle of capitalism, right? This is the tendency of the falling rate of profit. This is the problem of overproduction. In systems of the past, people were hungry because there wasn't enough food. But under capitalism, people become hungry because there's too much food. Because we've gotten so good at producing food, there's no room for the worker at the means of production. Under capitalism, right, each according to his ability. All right. Under capitalism, people are homeless, not because there's not enough housing, but because there's too much housing, right? And as a result of there being too much housing, people lose their jobs. And that's what the housing bubble burst during 2008. Dust James is in the chat. He mentioned the story of too much coal. And this pretty much sums it up, right? The story goes like this. There's a little boy, and it's cold, and it's in the wintertime, and the boy is very, very cold. And the boy says to his father, "Father, why is it so cold?" The father says, "Because we don't have any coal to heat the stove." The boy says, "Why can't we get some coal to heat the stove?" The father says, "Because I have no money." The son says, "Father, why do you not have any money?" He says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine." And the boy says, "Father, why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" And the father says, "Because there is too much coal." People are freezing because there's too much coal. People are hungry because there's too much food. People are homeless because there's too much housing. That's capitalism. That's the capitalist system. And socialism is eliminating that. It's eliminating that problem. And that's why China has been able to raise millions out of poverty. That's why the Soviet Union industrialized so rapidly, defeated the Nazis, invented space travel, invented cell phones. That's why Cuba has such an efficient healthcare system. That's why Bolivia had the highest rate of economic growth on the continent during the last few decades in South America. That's why Vietnam has had a booming economy. That's why socialism has been so successful, as it overcomes this. And understanding this difference is very key in being clear about what socialism is. Because if a society moves beyond production organized for profit, overcomes production organized for profit, has production organized for social use, it's therefore not capitalist. And this is what people don't understand. They say, well, it's not socialism if it's not purely democratic. It's not socialism if there's not direct workplace democracy. It's not socialism if it doesn't fit my perfect ideological blueprint. It's not socialism if it's not heaven on earth. Well, the problem with that is there is clearly something in the world that exists today that is not capitalism. Right? It's not capitalism in China. It's not capitalism in Vietnam. It's not capitalism in Cuba. It wasn't capitalism in the Soviet Union. It's not capitalism in Nicaragua. It's not capitalism in Venezuela. So what is it? Right? And you want to sit there and you want to say, well, it's just state capitalism. No. State capitalism is still production organized for profit, and it still has the same problems. But it's very clear that there are many economies around the world that are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. Okay? That's pretty clear. There are centrally planned economies that have overcome production for profit. So you have to call them something. I mean, you have to admit that they're something. And if you want to say, well, they're not socialist, there's an authoritarian state, there's this, there's that. You want to play that game. They're not capitalist. Right? They're definitely not capitalist. And they've overcome the problems of capitalism, and they are moving toward creating great material abundance. China is now the second largest economy in the world. It used to be the sick man of Asia. So, there's something. Right? And if you want to sit there and say, well, my version of communism is blah, 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 you can do that. You can do that. But you're still not getting over the point. You're not getting over the point. You're just not getting over the point, which is that they have overcome the irrationality of the capitalist system. And they are laying the basis for the abundance, the material abundance that can lay the basis for the higher stage of communism, for the breakdown of inequality, the breakdown of scarcity, etc. Right? Kim Iverson, Nordic States Socialist. All right. So I just wanted to make that point. And so now, as much as I don't like AOC, and I'm frustrated, I'm very disappointed by her in many, many ways. We've talked a lot on these lives about cancel culture. And we've talked about reaching out to average Americans. We've talked about the need to win people over. We've talked about the need to convince people to go another direction. We've talked about the need to find people who are right now wrong and convince them to be right. We've talked about this need. And I actually, I couldn't resist. I was going to do this a few lives ago, and it just didn't feel right. I'm going to do this now, right? And if you're the kind of person who doesn't care for this kind of thing, I respect that, right? Religion is a personal matter. It's a personal matter. Everyone has the right to their own views. What is this? Centralization as some kind of gotchas. Yeah. All right. All right. Centralization. Gotcha. All right. But I just want to read this to you, right? Because this is probably one of the most famous parables from the Bible, right? The Holy Bible. This is probably one of the most famous stories that Jesus Christ told. Did I miss a super chat here? Right. Zach Boyles. Oh, could Evergrande debt default and debts of Chinese real estate companies be a threat to China? Right. Debts, threat to China economy. All right, writing it down. You know, and the Christian religion very rapidly spread, you know, throughout the world. It very rapidly spread throughout the world. And if you look at the Christian religion, part of the reason that it was able to spread so rapidly throughout the world was that it focused on changing people. It focused on winning people over who had been hostile to it, right? The Apostle Paul very famously had gone around persecuting Christians, and they recruited him, and he became a very important Christian. You know, and this idea that one can change, that one can have made a mistake in the past, one can even have been a bad person, but can be won over to what's right. This is like a central theme in Christian religion, and it is what has made Christianity very effective. And on top of that, it is something that Western culture has very much valued, right? I mean, I've told many stories about this. So I'm going to read you this. I am going to read you this because I feel like, you know, it's funny. I heard this story told many times growing up, probably more times than I would care to hear it. For me, this was just common sense when I was growing up. But unfortunately, in the cancel culture atmosphere of the left, in the shrillness, in the anger, we seem to have forgotten this message. So whatever your religious beliefs are, if you're an atheist, if you're a Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you're Hindu, whatever, I think that you can appreciate the message of what I'm about to read. And then after that, we will go to the roll call, and then I'll answer your super chat questions. All right, central planning. Easier. 100 years ago. All right, so I'm just going to read this. All right, this is Luke chapter 15, starting with verse 11. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me a portion of the goods that falleth to me. And he divided them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far-off country, and there wasted his subsistence with riotous living. And when he spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed the swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, but no man gave unto him. And he came to himself, and he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. And he was yet a great way off. His father saw him, and had his compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in thy sight am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring him hither, that the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat, and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and he is found. And they began to be merry. Ad libs. All right. They began to be merry. And now his elder son was in the field, and he came and drew nigh to the house, and heard the music and dancing. And he called one of his servants, and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and would not go in. Therefore came his father, and entreated him. And he said, answering his father, Lo, these many years did I serve thee, and neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and that you never gave me a kid, and that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fattest calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad. For this thy brother was dead, and is alive again, was lost, and is found. Now, that's the famous parable of the prodigal son. And the message there is basically the father, whose son went away and spent all the money and lived frivolously, has returned home. And the father is very, very happy about it. Whereas the son who never left and was doing everything right the whole time, never gets such celebration. He says, this is unfair. I mean, I've been following the rules the whole time, and you never celebrate me. And the point is that it is a bigger celebration when someone who's been doing wrong starts to do the right thing. It's far better when someone who has been in the wrong starts to do the right thing than it is for people who've always done the right thing to just keep doing the right thing. That winning a victory against the forces of darkness is far more effective, is far more valuable than just having people that continue to do the right thing, continue to do the right thing. That in all things the goal is to expand the forces of good in the world and take away from the forces of evil. And when there can be a force that recognizes the wrongness of their actions, when there can be people who are wrong and change, when people can just seems pretty basic, pretty basic stuff, right? But yet, here we are, and I'm having to explain this. If we can get somebody who used to be anti-communist to embrace communism, if we can get somebody who used to be supporting these wars to oppose them, if we can get somebody who used to be racist to renounce racism, that's far more effective and far more valuable than just having people who've always been against it feel good about themselves for always being against it. The point is to win people over. And we need to be thinking about that. It's kind of unrelated to everything else we've been talking about on here. We were talking about AOC and her dress. We're talking about the nature of socialist production. I just wanted to throw that in there. You can add that last part as an appendix to one of my earlier streams. Win people over, because it's far, far better. Well, thank you, DL. I appreciate that. It's far better to win people over who don't agree with us than it is to simply sit there and be proud of ourselves. For being right. That's not the point. If we're right and we're alone and we just get to sit there in our righteousness, We've not accomplished anything. So I just wanted to add that part on to our interesting opening remarks where we talked about Rupert Murdoch and AOC and the nature of socialist production, production for use, etc. There you go. That's what I wanted to do. So now we can do our roll call, names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Then we got plenty of super chats to answer, which is good. Names and locations. Who's with us? Kendall in San Diego, Nate in Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, Temple City, California, Ryan in Oakland, Heavy Dukes in New York City, Wisconsin, Finland, Springfield, Missouri, Southern California, Lee County, North Carolina, Dust James, good friend, Ash in Chicago, Troy in Kansas City, JT24 in Mississippi, Seattle, Ground Zero, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Auckland, New Zealand, Stephen Clearly, Megan, healthcare worker from Arkansas, welcome Megan, Zach in Seattle, Mary in West Virginia, Stephen in Riverside, California, Dylan in California, Brian Schaefer in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Boston, Vancouver, Jenny Lynn out in Cincinnati, Julian Salazar in San Antonio, Benjamin in Florida, California, Bobby in Austin, Deha in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Very good. Welcome, Deha. Tucson, Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Detroit, Mo in Toronto. There you go. Los Angeles, Vinicius from Brazil. Saint Etienne in France. Maple, North Carolina. Gateshead, England, William Kane. A Better America, Northern Michigan, Salt Lake City. I.O. Hillary, shout out to you in New York City. John in Lurkersville. Mike in North Carolina. Mohsen from Iran. Grand Junction, Colorado. Who else is with us? Anybody else with us tonight? I will call you out names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. I already called you out. Heavy Dukes, New York City. Said it a while in. You're here. I saw it. I called you out. Bayonne, New Jersey. Red Illuminati. Bayonne, New Jersey. Jordan in Indiana. Welcome, Jordan. Carolyn in Staten Island. Repping. Comrades Tamara and Dario. Shout out to you, Carolyn. Richmond, Virginia, West Haven, Connecticut, Martin in Ireland, Dylan Small in California. Thanks again for the book. I've been reading it. Good stuff. Very interesting. Very, very interesting relative you have. Belgium, Indonesia, Java, Miami, Florida. Phil in Miami, Florida. Southwest Florida. Very, very good. Norwegian Red. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very good, folks. All right. So the first question is, should vaccinated people be given priority in ICUs? Now, that's like in the emergency room, right? Should people who are vaccinated be given priority? Well, the answer to that is I don't know, okay? And I would think that you cannot make... I don't know. First of all, I'm not a doctor, but I would think that you cannot make a blanket medical statement like that. You can't make a blanket medical statement like that, right? There's so many different circumstances that could be in a factor like that. Whether or not somebody's vaccinated is, in an emergency situation, is very low on the list. Are they bleeding? Is there internal bleeding? So you cannot, to make a blanket rule like that, you should give priority to people who are vaccinated in an I wouldn't be comfortable saying that. Now, there may be a situation, perhaps, where there's a specific medical emergency and there's a vaccinated person and there's an unvaccinated person, and somehow that affects the nature of the kind of care you want to give. Okay, maybe there could be a situation where one might do that. But to make a blanket statement like that, no. I'm sorry. When people's lives are on the line, the kind of decisions doctors have to make, they have to weigh many, many, many different factors. Many different factors. So you can't make a blanket assessment like that of any kind, right? The doctor has to do what is in the interest of preserving life, right? My understanding is they take the Hippocratic oath, right? Their job is to preserve life and be up to the standards of their profession. And no, I don't think it would be consistent with the way the medical profession orients itself to just make a blanket rule like that. I mean, what would you do? I mean, so one guy's been shot and he's bleeding. The other guy, he's, I don't know, he's, having heart palpitations. Well, the vaccination doesn't enter there. I mean, obviously, the guy who's been shot should be your priority, right? But then, okay, so maybe there's a situation. I mean, I could think of a situation where that might be a factor. But to make it a blanket statement, in all circumstances, we give priority to no, I would reject that. But I am not a doctor. I don't really know. So this is not official medical advice. This is just, you're asking me my personal opinion. And I can't think of a situation where you would want to make a blanket general statement. All right, Trump Milley. I've already been asked about Trump Milley, but we'll add that again. Trump Milley nuclear war. Right. So there you go. All right. The next question is, has Babavekian and the Revolutionary Communist Party, have they made any great contributions to communism? We'll give them credit where credit is due. In recent years, I would say no. But I did a great class called Mao and American Socialists. And you can watch it. It's very popular. The video's online. And I talk about the Chinese Revolution and its relationship with American communist activist groups. And in the 4th section, I actually talk a lot about the Revolutionary Communist Party. For example, in 1976, on the bicentennial, the 200-year anniversary of the United States, the Revolutionary Communist Party had a march called "We've Carried the Rich for 200 Years. Now let's dump them off our backs." And it was about 5,000 people came to this rally, this communist rally in Philadelphia. It was huge, right? 5,000 people marched through the streets of Philadelphia. We've carried the rich for 200 years. Now let's dump them off our backs. And there's a very famous photograph from that march of veterans, Vietnam veterans in their uniforms, marching with a banner that says, "We won't fight another rich man's war." Beautiful, beautiful. That march, that was the Revolutionary Communist Party. They did it. Nobody did it with them. They wouldn't allow other groups to be part of it. That was them. That was a great contribution, I think. I think that rally, that demonstration, the fact that it happened, that 5,000 people marched against the bicentennial celebrations in 1976 in a pro-communist message, veterans marching, "We won't fight another rich man's war." That's a contribution. So yes, that contribution was certainly made. And one thing about that group I will give them credit for is they are out on the streets, engaging with people about communism. They don't do this game where it's like, well, we can't talk to average people and we're gonna hide, right? And we're gonna try to infiltrate the labor unions and work under fake names and manipulate. They don't do this thing where we just pretend to be Democrats. And no, I mean, the RCP, to their credit, they go to colleges and they sell their newspaper. Now, obviously, the politics they're promoting are extremely different than mine. I don't agree with them in many ways, but they do engage with average people, which most communist groups refuse to do, right? The John Brown Volunteers are out on the street doing that. And part of the reason the John Brown Volunteers are out doing that is because I learned how effective that can be. And I learned that from the Revolutionary Communist Party. As much as I don't agree with them on many, many points, that was the first group I was around. When I was 18, 19 years old, I hung out with the RCP quite a bit. And, I saw their flaws and I disagreed with them on many, many things. But they taught me to do street outreach. They taught me to go out on the street and walk up to people I don't know and talk to them about communism and sell them newspapers and try to get them to pay actual money for newspapers. I remember when I was like 15, my mom and my brother were going to Cleveland and they dropped me off at a bookstore. And my mom says to me, "Do not leave the store. Whatever you do not leave the store." At the time, cell phones were kind of a new thing. So my mother gave me her cell phone. If there's an emergency, you can call this cell phone. You can call me, gives me the cell phone and all this. And so I walk into the store and they're having some kind of discussion. That's why I wanted to go to this RCP communist bookstore. And I remember, their discussion's over. And so one of the RCP leaders or whatever pulls a stack of newspapers, like, 50 newspapers, hands it to me. "Here you go. gives me the stack of newspaper. What am I going to do with this? Oh, we're going to go out and sell the paper. And I said, we're going to do what? He said, we're going to sell the paper. I said, wait a second. You want me to walk up to people that I do not know and try to talk to them about communism? You got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me. I mean, no. I can't do that. I said, no, we do it all the time. It'll be fine. And I was so nervous. I was 15 years old. This is probably, I wonder if this is like a violation of child labor laws or something. I don't care. I'm really glad they did this, so who cares? But I'm 15 years old. I'm underage. They put the newspapers in my hand. And they said, Caleb, go out and sell this newspaper. And I remember I walked up to people, you want a social paper? And I was so nervous, terrifying. It was utterly terrifying. I used to be shy, believe it or not. I used to be kind of a shy person. It was terrifying also because my family really did not approve of my politics. My family was very embarrassed that I was a communist, very embarrassed that I was constantly interested in communism. It was constantly telling me to keep my politics to myself. Stop, talking about this stuff all the time. It's embarrassing the family. You stop that. And I was an embarrassment, and I was, so my family was constantly telling me not to talk this way. But they put the newspapers in my hand, and I walk up to people. I will never forget the first newspaper I ever sold. I sold it to a couple. There was a man and a woman, and I walked up to them and I said, would you like to buy a communist newspaper? And they looked at it, and I was wearing my Letterman's jacket, right? I'm from a small town in Ohio, Orville, Ohio. I was an athlete. I had a Letterman's jacket with the letter O on it. And I remember the man looked at me and he said, well, I don't agree with communism, but you go to Oberlin. So I will buy your newspaper. And I sold my first newspaper because he thought I went to Oberlin College, because there was a big O on my jacket. I will never forget that. But I actually learned over the course of a couple of years that I was actually very good at selling newspapers. So I will give the Revolutionary Communist Party credit for the fact that they had the very big rally in 1976 against the bicentennial. The fact they're out on the street. And police brutality. I will give them credit for that, right? You may not realize this, but it didn't used to be trendy to talk about police brutality, okay? It didn't used to be trendy to talk about police brutality. It used to be that, the black community talked about police brutality and communists talked about police brutality, and nobody else did. And if you ever, and I remember I was in college, I was, I would volunteer some here and there with Black on Black Crime Incorporated, which was an activist group in Cleveland, Ohio. And I would tell people about these horrendous police brutality cases where people get, the police kill somebody and get away with it. I would tell people about it. And I would tell people about it, and they would go, that's not true. That couldn't be true. My uncle's a cop. That would never happen. That's just made up, And no, it was true. And now the whole country realizes it's true. With George Floyd, with Michael Brown, with Sean Bell. I mean, now the whole country realizes this is true. But, unfortunately, people didn't realize it. Well, the RCP, they did the October 22nd coalition, and that was them, and they were talking about police brutality. And in Cleveland, they were hanging out with Art McCoy and the Black on Black Crime Incorporated black activist group led by, that was talking about police brutality. I will give them credit for that. Now, there are other things about that group where we don't see eye to eye. I'm sure they vehemently disagree with almost everything I say nowadays. Well, not everything. They probably agree with me on a number of important points, but talking about police brutality and beating the drum of raising awareness around police brutality long before it was trendy, that's a good thing that they did. So, they made their contribution. But ultimately, my biggest difference with the RCP is that the RCP, their orientation is that they feel that only what they call the lumpen proletariat are capable of revolution. They feel that only impoverished African Americans, which they consider to be the lumpen proletariat, which is not Karl Marx's definition, that's not what the lumpen proletariat is. Their feeling is basically that only low-income African American folks are capable of being revolutionary. And they basically argue that the broad masses of Americans are what you call bourgeoisified, or labor aristocracy. And that's their feeling. And they also feel that because the broad masses of Americans are what they call bourgeoisified, the only way a revolution could happen to the United States would be on some kind of, it would be a rebellion among the deeply impoverished African American folks. And then that would spark off kind of a moral crisis or a kind of a moralist appeal among the middle class. They're against economic activism. They oppose slogans like money for jobs, not war. They are not involved in the labor movement. They don't support labor unions and strikes. They don't raise economic demands like healthcare and jobs and education. They maintain that's all economism. They focus on agitation around the issue of police brutality, and they tend to tail after the Democrats. Whenever a Republican gets elected, it started with Richard Nixon. They organized, when Richard Nixon was president, they organized a campaign called the Workers' Committee to Throw the Bum Out. And they were saying that Richard Nixon was a fascist, and that sound familiar? Richard Nixon was a fascist, and they were basically calling for a coup or the deep state to remove Richard Nixon. I mean, some of their rallies, I've heard stories where, they would be on a bullhorn and they'd say, maybe Richard Nixon's helicopter could crash. Maybe Richard Nixon could get lost on the way to the John. It was like they were calling for a coup d'etat against Richard Nixon. And that was when the Watergate scandal was going on, and that probably indicates they were heavily infiltrated, because that doesn't make sense, right? Especially because they were supposedly a Maoist communist party. Mao was still alive, and Mao supported Nixon, and Mao thought Nixon was better than the Democrats were. Mao actually liked Nixon, and Nixon was more friendly to China at that point than the Democrats were. So it really made no sense that the RCP was having these rallies basically calling for a military coup against Richard Nixon. But that shows they were probably infiltrated by the government. But that's the reality. Every communist group in the United States, to some degree or other, is manipulated by the government. Okay? That's just a reality. And so, the October League, which was another Maoist group, they did not call for impeaching Nixon. Now, they didn't support Nixon. They weren't that crazy. But they realized that the move against Nixon was because of divisions in the ruling class. They had a more sensible view. But the RCP ran this line: Richard Nixon is a fascist. If Nixon is not driven from office, if Nixon is not driven from office, we're all going to be in concentration camps. This hysterical, and at their rallies again, maybe his helicopter could crash. What's that about? Maybe he gets lost on the way to the John. And they're doing this working class, thing, and they want to remove Nixon. They're calling for a coup against Richard Nixon. And that was very weird. And that kind of showed that to some degree or other, what you can call the new left was very, very heavily infiltrated by the government. And then later, when Ronald Reagan became president, they did the same thing. They argued there was going to be nuclear war if Ronald Reagan was reelected. They organized rallies against nuclear weapons, and they had like a campaign called the No Business as Usual campaign. And at the time, the smiley face, the yellow smiley face, was a very trendy fashion symbol. So they had their symbol for their campaign was the yellow smiley face, except it was frowning instead of smiling, right? Instead of a yellow smiley face that was smiling, it was a frowning yellow smiley face. No business as usual, and it was against nuclear weapons. And I think they would chant like, "We must do all we can to stop World War III. We must do all we can to stop World War III." And they published a book. Bob Avakian wrote a book called A Horrible End or An End to Horror, basically arguing that the only way that there could be the only way that nuclear war could be prevented was with a Maoist communist revolution. They put out, there's a recruitment film of theirs you can watch from like 1987. It's on YouTube. You can find it. It's called They Say They Will. And it shows you where they were at. They're basically saying Ronald Reagan is threatening nuclear war, so we are, but if there's a nuclear war, we're going to rise up and have communist revolution. It's pretty wild. Dogs versus cats. All right. It's pretty wild, but, that's what they did. And, when Bush got in, I remember I was around them, drive out the Bush regime, drive out the Bush regime. And, and against Trump, they went as far as endorsing Joe Biden. I mean, Bob Avakian wrote an article calling on people to vote for Joe Biden. They used to say that you should never vote for anything, but they endorsed, Joe Biden, and they called on people to vote for Joe Biden. I remember when I got their press release, I'm on their press list, and I got their press release, and I got the article by Bob Avakian, and it said important tactic, and I thought, wait a second. And I'm just reading the article, Trump is a fascist, I'm reading this, wait a second. And then I saw voting for Joe Biden, and I was like, whoa. Yeah, the RCP, they endorsed Joe Biden, I mean, there you go. And they had a rally, I believe, the Refuse Fascism Coalition of the RCP actually had a rally when FBI director, when the FBI director, James Comey was fired. They had a rally supporting James Comey. Like, what kind of communist group has a rally supporting the FBI? And I saw that, and I was just like, are you kidding me? A rally to support the FBI director? And if you read their press release, it's like, oh, Donald Trump firing James Comey shows increasing fascism. Well, no, Donald Trump was elected. The FBI director was not elected, right? Civilian control over entities like the FBI is a good thing. Having an elected president fire the unelected FBI director is a good thing. Right? The fact that J. Edgar Hoover blackmailed various presidents, that J. Edgar Hoover was doing his own thing, that, the fact that a lot of the presidents, kind of live in fear of what you can call the deep state is not a good thing. And so the fact that an elected leader could fire the leader of a deep state policing agency, as much as I might not agree with why Trump fired James Comey, that was not a bad thing. It was not a bad thing. That Trump was able to fire James Comey. That showed civilian, that just shows that it wasn't generals over the White House. The military isn't telling the president what to do. The policing agencies aren't telling the president what to do. But the fact that the RCP had a rally to support James Comey, and that was just liberalism gone mad. I mean, that's Trump derangement syndrome. And that's my beef with the new left. When you take economics out of Marxism and it becomes kind of a culture war, you're defending, in some cases, you're defending the higher levels of the bourgeoisie. Trump represented an insurgency among lower level capitalists against, the Eastern establishment and some of the more wealthy capitalists. Now, that doesn't mean we should support Trump. Trump's disgusting in many ways, but we have to recognize that. But if you stop having it be about economics, and if it stops being about imperialism and class struggle and economics, and it becomes a moral question, at that point, you're going to get into weird situations where you had the RCP defending the FBI from Trump. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? But it's just as ridiculous as them calling for a military coup against Richard Nixon, right? And like appealing to the deep state to take out Richard Nixon. I mean, that's not, again, that's not what a communist group should be doing. That's not what China wanted. China did not want the deep state to remove Richard Nixon, and neither did Iraq. A good friend of mine sent me the Iraqi government, the Ba'ath Socialist government. They wrote a very good piece about how Nixon was removed, and it wasn't good, right? We need to build class struggle. We need to mobilize working people around economic demands. We need to build communities of solidarity. As capitalism increasingly does not have a place for millions of working people, we need to build communities of solidarity. We need to build working class organizations, and we need to raise economic demands. We need to put forward economic demands like healthcare for all, Medicare for all, like the program of the Center for Political Innovation. That's what we need to do. And getting caught up in a fight among the bourgeoisie, getting involved in a culture war, that's not where we need to be. That's my opinion. It's a very long answer, but it's a topic I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And I hope that RCP folks, if they're watching this, that I wish you well. I know you're on the right side of history. I know you're against imperialism and you're against racism. And, we may disagree on a lot of things, but I think you're good folks. And, I'm glad you've been spreading the word of Marxism out there. We're not going to agree on everything. I have a very different approach than you, but I respect you. I know you're not the enemy. And I just kind of laid out, I praised you for what you did right, and I laid out my differences with you. And I will do that. Sometimes it may not be strategic, and sometimes these lives get a little bit repetitive. What do you think of this party? What do you think of that party? Well, I just gave you my answer. I'm not a member of any party. I'm building a socialist educational think tank. because I think we need to get out of the movement into the masses. And I think none of these groups are winning right now. Not the Revolutionary Communist Party, not the Communist Party, not the PSL, not the DSA. None of these groups are winning. We need to get out of the movement and to the masses. We need to get to average Americans and win them to our program. And that's my message. All right. So, next question. Richard Medhurst. I love him. Great guy. Anti-imperialist, revolutionary. Like him. I'd love to work with him. Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger argued that the Nazi Party had sold out the principles he believed in. Martin Heidegger was a German conservative philosopher. He's credited with the concept of the conservative revolution, which was a big part of the Nazi ideology. The Nazis said we're revolutionaries, but we're waging a conservative revolution. We're restoring the past with a revolution. They were right-wing populists, and the Nazis were kind of the first right-wing populists, if there ever was such a thing. It was the first time we saw kind of a mass movement for right-wing ideas, and that is credited to Heidegger. I mean, Oswald Spengler was a big influence on the Nazis also, but he was anti-populist. He didn't believe in building mass movements. It was Martin Heidegger, the philosopher. He developed the notion of a conservative revolution. However, he, despite being briefly a member of the Nazi Party, he felt the Nazis had betrayed their principles. He felt the Nazis had sold out their Nazi principles, so he had a falling out with the Nazis. So Martin Heidegger was a right-winger. He was a big influence on Nazi thought, and then later he became a big postmodernist. And it's really hilarious. The Martin Heidegger, big Nazi, big fascist, big, originator of the term conservative revolution. It's kind of funny that Martin Heidegger, is now this big deal among postmodernists, right? I mean, if you go to postmodernists, love him, right? If you go to Left Forum, they all love Martin Heidegger. I mean, it's funny. You get canceled for talking to some intellectual in Russia. You get canceled for supporting North Korea. But if you like Martin Heidegger, who was a literal Nazi and was the originator of the Nazi concept of the conservative revolution, well, that's okay because the Congress for Cultural Freedom liked him, and because postmodernism, and because it's like philosophy, man. And it's so weird how this cancel culture works. It's very selective, right? And yeah, Martin Heidegger is on the right, not on the left. Martin Heidegger was very influential in Nazi stuff, but he's okay because the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the cultural left and the Frankfurt School found a lot of his philosophical concepts to be useful in their campaign against actual Marxism. Postmodernism is, this postmodern neo-Marxism. Postmodernism and Marxism are contrary to each other. Postmodern neo-Marxist is an oxymoron. Jordan Peterson is always going around saying postmodern neo-Marxists, the postmodern neo-Marxist, that's an oxymoron. Postmodernism says there is no truth. There is no grand narrative for humanity. It's competing narratives and trying to define objective reality as totalitarianism, and the truth comes from deconstructionism. All right? That's postmodernism. It says deconstruction, taking apart ideas, is how truth is found. That there are competing narratives, and they take apart ideas, and that's how we get to truth, and that any attempt to build a grand narrative, any attempt to say this is the truth, that's fascist or totalitarian. So Marxism, which is a narrative of human history, which is an ideology that preaches objective reality, which does give a clear trajectory to the human race, is by definition the antithesis of postmodernism. Postmodernists may use aspects of Marxism for the purpose of deconstruction. Right? Deconstruction is what postmodernists believe in. Marxism deconstructs certain aspects of our society, but it replaces them with Marxism. Whereas postmodernists only deconstruct. So there you go. Now, Heidegger is very useful to the postmodernists in their campaign against real Marxism. His philosophical viewpoints, his deconstructionist views are useful to them. So he's okay. And that shows you how fake postmodernists are. And the fact that breadtubers, if I got on a breadtube stream and I was like, I like Martin Heidegger, they'd be like, whoa, you're so deep, man. And that just shows how ridiculous these people are, right? But if I say, oh, I read a book by Alexander Dugin, they're like, oh, you're Satan. Why? He's a thinker in Russia. Martin Heidegger was an actual Nazi. Yeah, but the Frankfurt School said he was okay. My professor assigned me Martin Heidegger, and I can't think for myself. But my professor also told me that Russia is the most evil country in the world. So, they can't think for themselves. Think about it. Who's worse? An intellectual in Russia who's conservative but an influence on the Russian government and is very influential in China and in Iran and anti-imperialist countries, or an actual Nazi philosopher, Martin Heidegger? Who's worse? Well, obviously it would be Martin Heidegger, unless you're one of these stupid conformists, right? Well, my professor assigned me Martin Heidegger, so it must be okay. And my teacher and CNN also told me Russia is the most evil country ever. And so therefore, and it's groupthink, it's stupidity. And at the end of the day, most of these people have never heard of Martin Heidegger, and they've never heard of Dugin either, right? And it's, again, I'm not a Duginist. I'm certainly not a Heideggerian. I'm a Marxist. I believe in objective reality. I believe in historical progress. I believe in dialectical materialism. I am a Christian. I do think that fits with my Christian faith. But at the same time, I have a dialectical and historical materialist perspective. All right, next question. Is socialism necessary without imperialism? That's a very odd question. Is socialism necessary without imperialism? Okay, so imperialism is just capitalism in its monopoly stage, okay? So would it be necessary to abolish capitalism if it had never gotten into its monopoly stage? Sure, I guess. Sure, okay, yes. The Paris Commune was an uprising to abolish capitalism, and capitalism had not gotten into its monopoly stage, so yes, right? The worker rising up against the factory owner. This is before the rise of international corporations and stuff. The struggle against capitalism was valid prior to the era of imperialism, sure. However, in our modern age, in our modern time, capitalism is imperialism. And socialism is by definition anti-imperialism. If it's not anti-imperialism, it's not socialism. And if it's not anti-imperialism, it's not socialism. Let me just put it that way. So, sure, there was socialism, and there was a necessity of socialism and class struggle before the rise of imperialism. But in the age of imperialism, to be a socialist, you have to confront imperialism. The Popular Front versus the United Front. Okay, so let me just back up. All right, so what is the United Front? Well, the idea is, so after the Russian Revolution, communist parties are formed all over the world. The Social Democrats are very hostile to the communist parties because they say that they're aligned with this evil regime in Soviet Russia. They're a bunch of, they're authoritarians, they're Bolsheviks, sound familiar? So Lenin is telling the various communist parties of the world that if they want to be effective, they can't only organize their own people, right? Because not everyone can be a communist. And a communist vanguard party is a very demanding thing. You give the whole of your life to join a communist vanguard. So Lenin is telling the communist parties around the world to form united fronts. Invite Gabriel Raquel to have a conversation stream. He is a communist expert, specializes in fascist historic development. Okay, well, I'm open to that. If he wants to reach out to me, I'd watch some of his stuff. I'm open to that. But anyway, so the United Front is the idea that communists lead a mobilization around demands. The 8-hour workday, freeing political prisoners, the right of workers to go on strike, an end to wars, right? That the idea is that communists call for things that are in opposition to capitalism, that non-communists can agree with, that anarchists can agree with, that social democrats can agree with, that average working people can agree with. And they build a united front around their program, around certain things: jobs for all, healthcare for all, education for all, end the wars, free political prisoners. And that, they might have a united day of action, right? They might call a day of action for an 8-hour workday. And that's the idea of the united front. Is cancel culture a form of cultural imperialism? agricultural imperialism. They might call for a united front around this demand, and they would approach the socialists, they would approach the anarchists, they would approach labor unions, approach the activist groups, and try to get them to organize around this demand, right? And that is the tactic of building the united front. The united front. So they built the united front. And the response of social democrats to communists attempting to build the united front was to get even more hostile to the communists, to argue the communists are trying to infiltrate our groups. The AFL, the American Federation of Labor, banned any communists from joining. The social democrats, they said our main enemy is on the left, and that the social democrats became even more hostile to the communists as the communists tried to build this united front. And the idea was the communists would approach the social democrats with the united front, and that would kind of expose the leaders of the united front, right? The idea was, or that would expose the leaders of the social democrats, right? These communists show up and they're like, okay, you don't agree with communism. Let's have a national protest for the 8-hour day. And the social democrats say, no, we can't do that because you're a communist. And then the rank and file members of the social democrats go, wait a second. What's wrong with marching for the 8-hour day? Because they're communists, they're bad. And that kind of exposes the leaders, right? Because average workers are like, hey, I want an 8-hour day. These people want an 8-hour day. Why can't I protest with them? And it kind of exposes the leaders as being sectarian and as being more concerned about their anti-communism than actually winning the 8-hour workday. And the idea is that lays the basis for the communists gaining more influence because, they're offering a united front, and that forces the social democrats either to work with them or look really bad. That's the idea. So that's the united front. But the social democrats got so bad that they murdered communists in many places. There were, in Germany, there were communists. There was an uprising where, the social democrats murdered a bunch of communists. It was called Blut May or Bloody May of 1929. And so then the Communist International changed its tactic to the United Front from below. And the idea of the United Front from below is they no longer wanted to unite with the Social Democrats. Instead, they wanted to unite with the masses, with the broad masses of people, right? They weren't going to go to the Social Democrats and try to form a united front. Instead, they were going to go to average people because the Great Depression had just happened. Many people were starving and hungry, and build a united front from below. And just, hey, are you starving? Don't starve, fight. And they would organize unemployment councils. And they organized huge marches for veterans, to demand veterans benefits. And the idea was, instead of trying to compete with the leaders of the social democratic parties, we're just going to go straight to the masses. Kind of like out of the movement to the masses. That's what United Front from Below really was. We're not going to bother trying to compete with the leaders of social democratic parties. We're just going to go straight to the masses. The United Front from Below. That's what it was called. And during the United Front from Below, they waged a campaign against the Social Democrats. They accused the Social Democrats of being social fascists. But then later, you had the development of what was called the Popular Front. And the Popular Front was different from the United Front, and it was different from the United Front from Below. The Popular Front was an alliance against fascism. It was mobilizing society against one section of the ruling class, the fascists, and it was building a broad alliance against fascism, right? And the idea was capitalism naturally moves toward fascism in times of crisis because that's the only way capitalism can survive. And so because capitalism is moving toward fascism, the communists should position themselves at the center of an anti-fascist united front. And that includes social democrats, that includes average people, includes even wealthy capitalists. Roosevelt was considered an ally of the Popular Front, right? And the idea was they would build this anti-fascist front, the Popular Front, specifically against the fascists. So the Popular Front was different than the United Front because the United Front was originally an attempt to unify leftist and working class organizations. It was an attempt to unify social democrats, labor unions, anarchists, revolutionaries. That was the United Front. United Front from Below was getting lower and deeper to the real masses. The idea was to just go to the hungry and poor people and mobilize them. Stop wasting your time trying to take control and lead the movement. Just get to the the average people, win over the average people. That was the United Front from below. The Popular Front was about building a broad alliance with even members of the capitalist class, with even all kinds of people against the fascists, make the fascists the main target. So I guess that's the difference between the three approaches. And at the end of the day, I mean, you could argue that United Front from below and out of the movement to the masses are similar. My approach is similar. But there's some key differences, right? I don't advocate any of those tactics because those tactics were all tried in the 1920s and in the 1930s. And we're in very different times. And none of those tactics is the right approach. We don't have a broad mass socialist movement at this time, right? United Front tactics were used when there were millions of people in labor unions, which right now there are not. Labor unions are weaker than they've ever been in the United States. Millions of people in the Socialist Party and influenced by the Socialist Party. Now that's not the case. Socialism, despite the fact there's a big DSA, the actual socialism and class struggle groups are very weak and isolated. So, attempting to build a united front and get all the communists to have a joint day of action for one thing, therefore, I don't think that's going to be a very effective tactic because even if they did, that would be like irrelevant. I mean, it wouldn't really mean very much. But then having a united front from below, okay, I mean, getting to average people and mobilizing them, okay, fine. The only problem is we don't have a mass communist organization that's capable of doing that. I mean, again, we don't have an organization that's capable of feeding thousands of people and mobilizing them. A united front from below might be a good thing to do. We just don't have the facility to carry it out. I'm engaging in a mass campaign of socialist education, just trying to teach people Marxism. I'm not ready to build mass organizations to fight for jobs or fight for health care, and I'm not ready to do that because I don't have the ability to do that. You need lots of people. I'm trying to engage in a mass campaign of just education. So it's not a united front from below, even though it's a similar approach. It's out of the movement to the masses, but it's out of the movement to the masses to mobilize them, around economic demands. I don't have the capacity to do that. I think that's what Jackson Hinkle's trying to do. I think that's what the Medicare for All March was trying to do. I'm not in a situation where I'm capable of doing that. I'm capable of providing education, and I want to reach the masses with that education. But I'm not really doing United Front from below because that would be mobilizing the masses around demands. And then Popular Front, now is definitely not the time for a Popular Front because that would lead to liquidation. The reason that the Popular Front was successful was because the communists represented millions of people, and the Soviet Union was 1/5 of the world, and that the Popular Front, Roosevelt had to give something to the communists. In order to keep the communists in an alliance with him, he had to throw them a bone. He had to create the Works Progress Administration. He had to create Social Security. He had to recognize the Soviet Union. The communists were a big enough deal that in order for the anti-fascist liberals to get the communists on their side, both sides had to negotiate. Nowadays, it's like if all the communists in the United States said, "Okay, Biden, we'll support you against Trump," Biden would go, "Okay." If they said, "Okay, Biden, we're not going to support you against Trump," he'd go, "Okay." Like we don't have the forces to make a Popular Front effective. A Popular Front matters and is an effective tactic when it's supporting one section of the ruling class against another. It's a strategic alliance with one section of the ruling class against another, right? You deem one section of the ruling class to be fascist, so you align with the other against it. Right now, the communists don't have enough of an apparatus that such an alliance would matter, that it would result in anything. So a Popular Front now is not a very good tactic. But that's the difference between the three concepts. All right. So there's some website people said where they're arguing about whether or not I'm gay. Really? This is all you got to talk about, right? These people like, capitalism's in crisis, COVID-19, the danger of a new world war with China. You're worried about am I sexually aroused by women or am I sexually aroused by men? That is what you're worried about. That is what the leftist internet is worried about. Well, ask my wife. Why don't you? Ask my wife if I'm gay. Next question. My goodness. Childishness. Seriously. There you go. General Milley says he spoke to China behind Donald Trump's back. that shows, again, at the end of the day, as much as we pretend that the civilian government is in power, the military and policing agencies increasingly, have authority over the elected government. And that's the reality, right? I mean, actually, Sam Marcy wrote a very good book called Generals Over the White House. And I've talked about the FBI and how it has threatened the civilian government, and that, struggles in the ruling class. And that's basically what they're getting at with the deep state. When they talk about the deep state, they're acknowledging that there are entities that have power over the elected government. A lot of people are talking about how Biden, it seems like, he's taken directions from somebody. He says, now I'm supposed to walk out, but yeah, I mean, it's like, that the power lies somewhere else, right? And that the civilian government is not always who's in charge. And I mean, this General Milley thing is a revelation of that. That the U.S. military seems to, be above the president in some instances. There's a very famous incident during the Korean War where General Douglas MacArthur threatened to nuke China, right? Because China was coming to support of North Korea during the Korean War. So General Douglas MacArthur, without asking President Truman, threatened to nuke China. And he was fired for that, because you can't threaten to nuke somebody without the permission of the president. Well, they talk about how nowadays, in the 70s and 80s, that kind of thing may not happen, right? There's, Sam Marcy's book, Generals Over the White House. It talks about how basically the military-industrial complex fired Jimmy Carter because he was reducing military spending, and how, basically the military-industrial complex kind of got rid of Jimmy Carter's presidency. So these things go on, and that it's naive to think that we just have that the military, they just listen to the president, right? And the FBI, they just listen to the president. And the CIA, they just listen to the president, right? And we get to vote for it, and so we're really in control. We control the FBI, we control the CIA, we control the Pentagon. Didn't you know that? It's a democracy. It's just this great democracy. We get to vote for who's president, and the president is the commander-in-chief of the army, and the president appoints the head of the CIA and can fire the FBI director. So really, we're in control. Did you know that? Except we're not. We're not in control, actually. It looks like the policing agencies, it looks like the deep state, it looks like these entities have a lot of power. So there you go. All right, worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives are not bad. Worker cooperatives are not bad, but they're not socialism, because they're still production organized for profit, right? A worker co-op has a profit. Now, those profits are shared among the workers. Every worker is a shareholder, right? He gets a share of those profits. But at the end of the day, it's still a for-profit entity. It's still functioning according to the market. It's still production organized for profit. It's just those profits are shared. And, all the problems of production organized for profit still exist under the worker cooperative system, right? Under the worker cooperative system, you could still have technology eliminate jobs. You could still have crises of overproduction. You could still have a prison industrial complex and a military industrial complex. You could still have boom-bust cycles. You could still have all kinds of problems. You could still have, a worker-owned cooperative might pollute the environment because it was cheaper, right? I mean, all the problems of production organized for profit still exist under worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives are good, and in the context of socialism, they're even more effective. In Venezuela, they really promote worker cooperatives, and in various socialist countries around the world, they have worker cooperatives. But in the context of capitalism, they're more egalitarian. No one's exploiting anyone else. It eliminates that rule of it eliminates that problem of inequality between the owner and the wage worker. Okay, but you still don't have all the other problems associated with production organized for profit. You go read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels. That explains what capitalism is, how it works, the problems. Go read chapter 3 of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels. That explains what the Marxist view is. And it's not, this view that, okay, there's capitalists who own the factories, there's workers who work in the factories. That's unfair. That's part of Marxism. That is part of Marxism, but that is far from all of Marxism. That's far, far from all of Marxism. Marxism is so much more than that. And if that's all you've got is the worker is not paid the full value of what he works, he's exploited by the factory owner for surplus value, that's just a small part of Marxism. That's not the whole thing. Alrighty. Alrighty. All right. Slave empires versus the British Empire differences. Well, I mean, you're talking about Greece, Rome, Mesopotamia, Babylon, the Persian Empire, ancient Egypt, and you're talking about that versus the British Empire. Well, the British Empire really emerges to be what it is in the 1800s. I mean, the height of the British Empire's strength is like the 1800s. It starts to decline most significantly after World War I. It really starts to decline, but, the height of its influence is the Victorian years, the 1880s, 1890s. That's, the height. The Victorian era is the height of the British Empire. Differences. Well, it's a different mode of production. Slavery is the mode of production of the Roman Empire, of the Greek Empire. There's the various city-states of ancient Greece and Egypt and Babylon. That's slavery, right? Whereas the British Empire is capitalism. It's industrial capitalism. So that's a pretty big difference. What else is there? What other differences are there? And what other differences exist? Well, there's also... that the British Empire was primarily a maritime empire. And thank you for the super chat, Herb Bryant. It was primarily ocean-based, and it was all over the globe, right? The Romans claimed to be that they ruled the whole world, but they ruled the known world, right? I mean, the British Empire was all over the world. I mean, they had parts of South America that they controlled. They had Australia, they had all over Asia, all over the Caribbean, all over. I mean, the British Empire was all over the world, right? They talk about the sun never set on it. So, and it was mainly, built by a navy, and that navy controlled the trade routes. So that's a pretty big difference. So we're talking about two different time periods. So there you go. Alrighty. All right. Buying water at the movie theater in New York City. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, it's just, whatever. That's capitalism, right? I mean, but you are kind of a captive audience. You're literally a captive audience there at the movie theater, right? You can't go and buy your soda somewhere else. You're not allowed to bring outside food into the theater, so they jack up the price, right? That's how these things tend to work, right? That's why the soda in the story that I told cost $5.50. And yeah, the fact that we're sitting on top of water, as Red Illuminati points out, I mean, there's an abundance of water that doesn't stop them from charging you for it. Kind of like the parable of the water tank. If you read We Are City Builders, the educational manual of the Center for Political Innovation, I include Edward Bellamy's very famous parable of the water tank. So there you go. All right. How did Boris Yeltsin come to power? Well, the Soviet Union fell, and he was elected, right? He was the first president, right, after the fall of the Soviet Union, right? He had led all these protests against the Soviet Union. He was a figure within Soviet politics who became anti-government. You had the attempted coup against Gorbachev, right? The so-called hardliners, arrested Gorbachev. And then you had Boris Yeltsin leading the protests, and then you had the Soviet Union dissolved, and then Boris Yeltsin became the president, the first president of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. And that was Boris Yeltsin, and that's how he came to power. He was a pro-Western leader, and Bill Clinton used to make fun of him. According to what I heard from Bill Bradley, right? I went to an event where Bill Bradley, the former U.S. Senator from New Jersey, I believe, he spoke, and he talked about how he went over to Russia during the Clinton administration, and they treated Boris Yeltsin like a doormat. They would say, let's go stuff some more shit down Boris's throat, and they thought it was hilarious that Boris Yeltsin, he presided over. They twisted his arm, and he didn't stand up and fight for Russia, and they presided over Russia being economically looted in the 90s. Go and watch that speech. Type Bill Bradley, Soviet Union. I mean, it was a really powerful speech I saw by Bill Bradley. Not a pro-Putin speech, by the way. Very critical of Putin in that speech, but he described, the tension between the United States and Russia and the roots of it, and how during the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Clinton administration, they went over there and they acted like pirates. I mean, they just looted the place, and people died, and they destroyed the living standards, and it was pretty awful. So there you go. All right, each according to his ability. What does that mean, right? Well, the quote is from each according to his own ability to each according to his needs. But then Karl Marx explains that if you read the Critique of the Goethe program. The Critique of the Goethe program, Karl Marx explains that labor becomes life's prime want, not a means of survival, right? That in such a society, people work because they feel like it. They work to entertain themselves. That labor becomes life's prime want rather than a means of subsistence. That's the idea. And that each according to his ability means, obviously it means that people are no longer really compelled to work. They work because they feel like it. Each according to his need is the idea. And the Critique of the Goethe program, where he talks about the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. That's kind of the basis for that. Kim Iverson talks about Nordic states being socialist. I haven't watched enough of her material to know the basis for that, but that's a misconception a lot of people have. That's widespread in the United States. People think the USA is half socialist because we have a post office and an income tax, but we also have, a stock market. So we're half socialist, half capitalist. This is a common misconception, and this is why I don't like AOC's dress. I don't like the message on AOC's dress because it reinforces this delusion that socialism and capitalism are there's this continuum, and sometimes we're a little more socialist, and sometimes we're a little more capitalist, and no. All right. Centralization being a gotcha. Well, look, this is a response you'll get. When I talk about socialism as a centrally planned economy, you get some people who come up and they say, well, no, there's centralization in capitalism. Yes, but it's centralization to make profits. Amazon centrally plans its activities. Walmart centrally plans its activities, and it does so very effectively, and it uses computers to do so. But it centrally plans to make profits, right? It's production according to profit. Whereas planning according to public good is socialism, right? And even if you have big centralized entities under capitalism, they're still functioning according to the profit motive, and you still have the anarchy of production, right? They're still not functioning in a rational way because they're still under the dictate of profits. All righty. The threat, debt to China. Well, the thing that you have to understand is debt a threat in China's economy? No, because the Chinese Communist Party could just cancel that debt. Right? I mean, that's the thing. The Chinese Communist Party has the ability to take economic moves. When the Chinese stock market crashed in 2015, the Chinese Communist Party just walked in and they banned short selling, and on threat of arrest, they just stepped in. And at any point, the Chinese Communist Party could just go, you know what, this debt, it's done. Now, they probably won't, but they could. And if it became a threat to the economy, they might. And that's what you have to understand. The market is not in control in China. The stock market is not in control in China. It's there. The market exists. The stock market exists. But it's just there because the party wants it there. And at any point, the party could just go, nope. And that's what you need to understand. Okay. All right. Is central planning today easier than 100 years ago? Yes, because of computers. And look at how Walmart centrally plans their operations. Look at how Amazon centrally plans their operations. This economic calculation problem that libertarians talk about is malarkey, right? We could just as easily have a socialist centrally planned economy. Right now, there's a lot of central planning in major corporations. We could very easily have a centrally planned socialist economy much more efficiently than the Soviet Union did. We could do it. So why do radlibs pretend to be leftists? Because people don't know what leftism is. People think there's the left and the right, right? If you're not a conservative, you're on the left. Well, these radlibs, leftism refers to a political movement that goes back to the French Revolution that strives to build a more egalitarian society. When the French Parliament or the National Assembly was formed, those who were loyal to the king and feudalism sat on the right, and those who were looking to build a new society and get rid of injustice, who called themselves the innovators, they sat on the left. Leftism is a political current that seeks to build an egalitarian society. It seeks to build a better world that is marching into the future. It is an optimistic political current that comes out of the bourgeois revolutions, the spring of nations. 1848 is when leftism kind of became widespread throughout Europe, and leftism, the leftist current, as you can call it, the left is the believers in historical progress, those who challenge tradition and existing institutions and social hierarchies, those who strive for a more egalitarian society. And Marxism comes out of the left. What are the few specific benefits of being centralized that couldn't be achieved and distributed? I don't even know what that means. I really don't know what your question means, my friend. So that's the left refers to a specific current: communists, socialists, anarchists. That's leftism. Whereas rad libs, radical liberals, they're not really from that current. So they're not part of the ideological left. They're people with a more liberal interpretation of events, buying into the standard logic of this society. All right, the Trump, Milley, and the threat of nuclear war. Well, I talked about General Milley and how it seems like the deep state and the military, and there's a lot of forces that secretly have power, and that it's not simply the elected government ruling over these entities. But the danger of nuclear war is real, right? I mean, that's not a joke. Nuclear war is not a joke, and that's why this anti-Chinese propaganda that we're constantly seeing is dangerous. It's not a joke. It is not a joke at all. And there you go. Dogs or cats? I like dogs. I really do. I don't own any pets. I've never had a pet in my life. I've never had a pet. My grandparents had a dog, and when they would come to visit, they would often bring their dog with us, and I liked the dog. It was very cute. I didn't always like the dog. When I was little, I was kind of afraid of the dog a little bit, but, I like dogs. I like dogs, right? I mean, I don't think I would ever own one. I don't think I'm ready to own a dog, but I'm more of a dog kind of guy if I had to pick dogs or cats. All due respect to my cat owners, and some of you do a really good job. There's some people that own cats, you go to their home, it's fine. However, there are some people that own cats, and you walk into their home, and that smell of cat urine, oh my God. Yeah, so if you own a cat, my advice to you, if you ever want me to come over to your house, which, again, very few of you watching this probably want me to come over to your house, but if you ever want me to come over to your house and you're a cat owner, make sure your house does not smell like cat pee, because cat pee is, it's awful. It is, yeah, it is something else. It is something else, but no, I've never had a pet. I never have. There you go. Never had a pet. Just never had them growing up, and never had one. It's interesting to think about, right? Some people say, how can you have never had a pet? Pets are just the most important thing, but just never had one. So there you go. All right. Is cancel culture a form of cultural imperialism? You could say that. I mean, in a lot of countries around the world, especially on like gender issues and stuff, a lot of people around the world just, in the developing world, if you talk to them about LGBT stuff, and they will be very hostile to that. And in their level of development and in the society that they live in, where patriarchal structures are very important, where the family is something that people are very economically dependent on, they will view LGBT stuff with a huge amount of hostility. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't promote LGBT rights? No. Does that mean we should not, defend the rights of LGBT people? Of course not. But it's something to be aware of. And when people make the LGBT issue, or aspects of the LGBT issue, that's it. That's it. I mean, I'm sorry. That's really first world chauvinism, I would argue, because I'm sorry, but do you think that that all the people that fought in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, that the National Liberation Front, if you could go back in time, okay, go back to the 1960s and 70s when the Vietnam War was going on, do you think that if you interviewed the various soldiers, many of whom were women, so many women fought in the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, and you said to them, what is your opinion of homosexuality? What do you think they would say? Do you think that they would have all gone back in 1960, back in 1970, they would have gone, oh yes, we love gay rights? Probably not. Probably not. Many of them would probably have said, we just don't think about that. What are you talking about? But on top of that, there would probably have been a lot of the folks in Vietnam, who were fighting for the National Liberation Front in a communist army who would have been hostile and said, well, that's bourgeois decadence. We don't have that here. So therefore, according to BreadTube and Thought Slime and people like that, we should not support Vietnam and its national liberation struggle, right? Because, oh, they're just a big army of homophobes. Well, that would be ridiculous. If you were to go back to the 1950s when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was having his civil rights marches, and you were to ask people at those civil rights marches, what is your opinion of gay marriage? Do you think that men should be able to marry other men, women should marry other women? If you went to the Montgomery bus boycott, if you went to the 1963 March on Washington where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, and you took a poll of the audience, very few people there would have told you they were for gay marriage. And so therefore we shouldn't support the civil rights movement, right? Because there was just a big movement of homophobes and, I mean, that's ridiculous, okay? Look, people can be on the right side of history and, thank you, Tusker. People can be on the right side of history. They can be on the right side of history and, not be aware on certain issues and not share, the most enlightened perspective on various issues. And that's just something you have to recognize. And I don't care, honestly. I think Minister Farrakhan is an amazing leader of the black community. I don't care that his position on homosexuality is problematic. I mean, I care in the sense that, it'd be great if he wasn't like that. Ice cream. All right. It would be better, obviously, if he was, pro-LGBT. But he's not. That doesn't change the fact that he's an amazing leader of the black community, right? There are various anti-imperialist leaders. Again, it would be better if they took this position, but that doesn't change their position in the class struggle. And, again, when people make it all just about this social liberalism, that shows they don't really seem to care about the conditions people are facing. They don't care that people are starving. They don't care that countries are ground into poverty. They just are really concerned about their right to, their social liberalism. That's what they're concerned about. Well, I respect that, for LGBT people who are not allowed to be who they are, for trans people who are not allowed to be who they are. It's awful, okay? It's awful for them. And they shouldn't go through that. And what they go through is wrong. And I have, many LGBT friends and many trans friends. And, I'm not going to endorse what these people have experienced, the bullying, the hate crimes, the discrimination. I'm not going to endorse that. I would never support that. I recognize that needs to be stopped. There needs to be kindness and affection for such people. I recognize that. And I'm opposed to any discrimination, and I'm opposed to any mistreatment, and I think those folks should be able to be who they are. But that said, you can't make that the dividing line. When you make that the dividing line, we should all support Israel, right? Because Israel is more pro-LGBT than the Palestinians. That argument is routinely made in liberal circles. At the LGBT Center in New York City, they won't allow Palestinian groups to meet. Well, that's their argument. Israel's pro-gay. It's just, I guess we have to support Israel now. It's like that. That's where this logic leads, right? That there is more than one issue. Hearing centralization, I think of capital, central power, single leader, ruler, consolidation of power, and temptation. What are reasons for it? Well, the reason for it is that we're eliminating the anarchy of production, and we are implementing a rationally planned economy. That is the argument. The idea is that means of production function rationally for the good of society, and that with central planning we are overcoming the chaos of the market, and we can ensure that people have what they need by having a central plan, sitting down and saying, okay, we need this many houses, we have this many homeless people, okay, we need this much food to be produced. It gives us the ability to make sure that everyone has what they need. That's the idea of central planning, right? And that is why economic central planning is superior, is because it puts rational decision-making at the center of economic activity in order to make sure that things go on. That's the idea. Okay, as far as ice cream, I really like mint chocolate chip ice cream. That would be my favorite type of ice cream. And on that note, folks, we're going to call it off here. We're going to end it here, but I will be live tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'm going to do 2 p.m. since I'm off work, so I'll be back tomorrow at 2. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Fusion City now. Good night.